Dear colleagues, dear guests, let me start our work. Today is the 14th of January 2022, 17:00 Moscow time. The session of the Dissertation Committee dedicated to the defense of the thesis by Bordachev, Timofey, Vyacheslavovich, seeking an academic degree of Doctor of Political Science in the degree field 5.5.4 International Relations on the topic the relations Russia and the European Union and the origin of the crisis of the European international order after the Cold War. Let me open this session by the act of Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University, Alexander Valentinovich Gnetov, dated the 7th of October 2021. I, Kudulay Konstantin Konstantinovich, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor, Head of Department of European Studies, St. Petersburg University, was appointed Chairman of this Dissertation Committee. The same act specifies the members of the Dissertation Committee as well. Natalia Valerievna Yeremina, Doctor of Political Science, a Professor of the Department of European Studies, St. Petersburg University. Natalia Yurovna Markushina, Doctor of Political Science, Professor of the Department of World Politics, St. Petersburg University. Stanislav Leonidovich Tkachenko, Doctor of Economic Sciences, Professor of the Department of European Studies, St. Petersburg University. And a Doctor of Economic Sciences, St. Petersburg University. In the remote mode with us is Marina Mikhailovna Lebedeva, Doctor of Political Sciences, is with us here, the head of the Department of World Political Process, Global Political Process, Moscow State University of International Relations. And online with us is Andrei Pavlovich Tsigankov, PhD, Professor of State University of San Francisco, the United States of America. Can you hear and see us? Yes. Also with us is Timofey Vyacheslavovich Bordachev. I would like to remind you that there's an audio and video recording taking place that is accompanied by simultaneous interpretation between Russian and English, and it's broadcast on the website of St. Petersburg University. On this website, you can send email, where you can send emails with your questions. All questions will be relayed to me by the technical services, but the questions should have a direct relation to the presentation of the candidate or the content of his dissertation, and you have to specify your affiliation and your name. No questions that have no relation to the academic discussion or the dissertation will be read. The same relates to anonymous questions. In accordance with the procedure of awarding academic degrees of Candidate of Sciences and Doctor of Sciences at Petersburg University, the session of a dissertation committee can be deemed illegitimate if not less than 2/3 of the established membership of the dissertation committee, but not fewer than 4 people are present. Our dissertation committee consists of 6 people. All 6 people are here, including 1 member in the audiovisual contact with us in the remote mode. Please, I would like to ask the member of the dissertation support office of St. Petersburg University, who is with us here, to start the registration logbook, and I would like to read out the agenda. The first one, well, the whole duration of the session is approximately 2 hours. There's a short presentation, item number 1, short presentation by the chairman of the paperwork. Then short presentation of the candidate, 20 minutes, about the dissertation, questions to the candidate, not more than 2 minutes per question. Answers of the candidate, 5 minutes to the for all questions. Then members of the Dissertation Council will take turns to read out their reviews, 10 minutes per speaker. Then the chairman would do the same, 10 minutes. Then answers of the candidate, not more than 20 minutes for all questions. There will be an open floor discussion. Next, anyone who is willing to speak up here, who's in the room, please enter your name into the registration logbook, and also, of course, put down your affiliation, your name, etc., in order to be able to speak. I would like to to announce here that the questions that will be received through the email, which are too lengthy, which would take 2 minutes to read, will not be read either. The answers of the candidate, 2 minutes per question, if there are any questions that are viable through the email, and then the members of the Dissertation Council will have a 5-minute break to deliberate their verdict, and then the open roll call voting procedure, and then the entering of the results into the minutes. Then the decision is taken, and the concluding statements of the candidate, 2 minutes, will conclude the agenda. So, the short presentation of the chairman. The dissertation of Timofey Bordachev for seeking an academic degree of Doctor of Political Science in the degree field 5.5.4 International Relations, on the topic the relations between Russia and the European Union and the origin of a crisis in the European international order after the Cold War, was accepted for defense by the act of Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University on the 16th of September 2021. The number of publications is 15 in the refereed Ministry of Education and Science publications, 5 publications, journals, 5 publications, and the Web of Science Scopus indexed journals, 10 publications. All the paperwork that has been submitted by the candidate meets the requirements of St. Petersburg University, and it's available from the member of the National Support Office who is present here. And do you have any questions to the candidate? Do we need to go over all the paperwork that's been submitted? No questions, no chance. Timofey Vyacheslavovich, the floor is yours. Dear Chairman, dear members of the Dissertation Committee, dear colleagues and friends. Several decades ago, in the preface of my work, 20 Years of Crisis, of the work 20 Years, Edward Howard wrote, at the moment when war is broken out, it could be fatally simplified to reduce the origins of catastrophe to the egoism of leaders the European international order is now undergoing the most tense and risky moments of its history. 30 years ago, at the beginning of the 90s, our rational arguments and our imagination how a European world order could international order would look like after the Cold War. We were very optimistic, and if there was a war, we thought they could be suppressed. This war could be suppressed by suppressing the egoism of countries' leaders. But now we are at a moment where peace, the retaining of peace, is a very pressing problem, not only for Europe but for us, because there in Europe there's a center of conflict of powers juxtaposed against each other and poised to wage a war, an all-encompassing war with a view of being the winner. The European order, international order, was created but it takes its origin to the modern times. After 50 years after this European order, Russia became part of, and now we are thinking where we are in the place where Russia became part of that international order. For Russia, the most important task then of survival was to be part of the European order. In other words, a part of the balance of power on which this order is based. All the relations between Russia and other European countries at very critical moments either derived from the answers of this question or to this question or the implications of it. And the end of the Cold War, it was a pivotal moment, and therefore my dissertation is dedicated to the relations between Russia and Europe, because, as I mentioned, Russia's integration into Europe was at that time possible after the Cold War, and therefore, because the structure of international arena was rife for that. The world that emerged after the Second World War in its political structure was the most balanced one than it had been before. It's an ideal expression of Edward Carr's ideals, and this order should be a balance of the interests of the countries that are able to destroy this order. And the Security Council was this organ that was a deterrent. And Russia has always been part of the Security Council. And liberal democracies created this order in the second half of the 20th century. And the very important part of this order after 1991 was the basis of the world order, was to the factor of countries abandoning using force to advance their interests. The USA, of course, kept the leading position because of their military capacities, but for all the other countries, military use was completely nullified. And of course, Europe accounted for this factor, and Russia accounted for this too. But of course, Russia retained its military potential. One of the most important contradictions was that Russia could not be accepted into the order, into European order, because in all other ways except the military, it was weaker than any member of the European Union, but in terms of its military potential, it was stronger. And that was a stumbling block. Only when Russia left the liberal European order, when in 2008 Russia used force against Georgia, it left this liberal order, and that led to the conflicts, to the culmination of which we are now approaching. And any state, from the point of view of the theoretic paradigm, every state is pursuing its egoistic interests, answering only to their citizens. And of course, they are unable to take account of the interests of other states in their foreign policy. And this egoistic vectors lead to a revolutionary situation when a state, a country, decides that their interests cannot be pursued within the existing world order or continental order, they decide to disrupt it. The international institutions, in their most ideal form, are a result of the compromise between participation states based on their military capacities. The embodiment of this deal is the mechanism of taking decisions in the European Union. And where the weights of the votes depend on the proportionate populations of these countries. The international security system is stable when these five nuclear powers that are members of the Security Council, when they're present there. Therefore, international interests that are based on the balance of power, and this is the most important category in our dissertation, they are able to create peaceful and stable relations or relationships between their participants. And one fantastic example is the European integration as an achievement of European political history. And the central hypothesis is that international institutions cannot fulfill the function of peacekeeping in relations with the countries that are not part of this balance of power. This is the most important systemic reason of the crisis of international order, which is based on the balance of power and the institutions that are formed without Russia, and to join which for Russia it was impossible for the 30 past years. Both NATO and the European Union. Therefore, the second part of my hypothesis is that the progress in the development of European integration, as any close European pact, would inevitably lead to the crisis that we have now, because the most powerful European country could not or would not be made part of this order. The question that we ask of political science is whether our discipline has not a prognosis function but a descriptive function, whether it is true. But I hope that my statements, my descriptions are directed into the future as well, because when we take into account the balance of interests of all the countries, it was the foundation of international security after the Second World War. Can we do it today as well? If we look at today's security beyond Europe, if we recognize that the international world order will not be European, that the natural part of it will be other countries like China, Russia, and India, to to save the situation in security, in terms of security, Europe should stop being the center of international politics. Not in fact, as we witness today in international trade or economic development, but institutionally as well. The European problem cannot be solved on the European soil, and with all these structural factors, the structural factors that exist in Europe. We should take into account the structural factors globally. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, dear colleagues and friends, I'm very happy to speak here because St. Petersburg was at the beginning a symbol and part of European destiny of Russia in political, cultural domains, and I'm absolutely confident that the international order in Europe and St. Petersburg, because will be enriched if St. Petersburg becomes a world center as well, and I hope that we will see a rapprochement of these two centers, and I hope that it will decrease the risk of an international conflict that we are witnessing today. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, any questions to Timofey Vyacheslavovich? I have a question that is very close to my remark. In the review, you talk a lot about the Cold War, and you have very interesting treatment in the dissertation. The end of the Cold War, because of the absence of the loss of the Soviet Union. I don't think so. I think the European political discourse is based on the tenet that the West will emerge the winner, and they think they're superior. And would you like to elaborate on your point of view? Maybe all the questions. Thank you very much. Very interesting to hear what you had to say. My question is about the formulation of the dissertation and your vision. First of all, the European, do you see it as a whole or as a conglomerate of positions and approaches? And what prevailed at what periods of time when they build strategy? When we talk about the interaction between the European Union and Russia, it would be interesting and important to see what relation they're building with the Eurasian Union, Economic Union, because This is a factor of Russia positioning itself to when it's to be part of the European Economic Union, Eurasian Economic Union. We will discuss the reviews that I enjoyed reading. Well, in terms of the treatments or of the end of the Cold War that exist in Europe. In my work, I didn't turn to discursive theories. The question about this narrative that you pointed out after the second war was not primary for this discussion. For me, it was more important a rationalist traditional view. But the factor that you pointed out is very important. But 30 years have passed, and if we again apply discursive theory, these views change under the influence of power, strength. The vision that was created after the Second War, after the Cold War, now wasn't the key driver. When we talk about some countries in Europe or the United States thinking about the Cold War, that they won it, then if they base their policies on this, then to me they would act irrationally. In terms of second question, I adhere to Ryan Niebach ideas: moral man, moral society. The individual reason is the servant of the collective interests. That's even if some countries in the European Union are very rationally in terms of their view of Russia and the relationship with Russia. Within this union, their policy follows the collective interest. Well, with the exception maybe with Hungary or Italy. Well, sanctions of Russia. Even Hungarians and the best friends of Russia from Hungary and Greece, they vote in favor of these sanctions. I think that any collective opinion of an institution is a bargain between these participants, members, and therefore it's less influenced by individual reasoning, individual members' reasons. And the collective policy cannot be more moral than the moral positions of any one member of the collective. In terms of the attitude of Europe towards the Eurasian Economic Union, They just don't recognize it because they don't believe in the legal foundations of this union. I think that the international order that emerged after the Cold War, because it was oriented at the European Union, except the military domain, and NATO as that's including NATO. That's the military. The European Union cannot tolerate the existence of other integration institutions, and this is why they don't recognize the Eurasian Economic Union. And that's what I was talking about when I talked about the hypothesis. The institution that serves an institution that is successful within itself is destructive to the outsiders. Because all the reviews have been published on the website of the university, I suggest that only the main points are read by the reviewers, and your comments, of course, and critical remarks and questions. Do you have any objections? No. Therefore, dear, I will point out some issues. My full review is published. I think that we have the treatment of the European Union and Russia in equal share, and very interesting treatment, very interesting approach to expand the paradigm, because usually paradigms limit possibilities, and I was very interested in seeing this approach in that the Dissertation author found a basis to look at different liberal and realist and other concepts, and this is a structural factor. I would like to highlight as well that I saw some methodological novellas, and I will not read all of it, but I would like to point out, emphasize that is the factor of non-participation. Usually we look at the reasons of participation, but here we see the treatment of the factor of non-participation, and that's done on an equal footing with the why a country participated in something. Another valuable part is that the author looks at the behavior of parties of the creation of cooperation because of conflict, not because of the mutual affinity. So the conflict became the basis of cooperation. The most important question on my part is what I see in the contents that the contents show that a lot of sources have been dealt with, but unfortunately what I don't see in my historical soul craves that as when this document was created, in what conditions, etc. It would be interesting to see the periodization of these relations, and we have, of course, in a traditional periodization, but I would like to see what the author thinks of the traditional breakup and maybe devises his own periodization. In terms of the strategy of foreign policy, we need to look at identity, because the European Union is building identities or negotiating identities, and Russia is creating the Russian world, and therefore I would like to see that some questions that I ask in my review are not are debatable, and I will not ask them. I'm satisfied with your presentation. It's a very relevant work. The dissertation corresponds to meets all the requirements of St. Petersburg University, including the plagiarism clause, and the candidate deserves the academic degree of Doctor of Political Science of St. Petersburg University. Thank you. Marina Mikhailovna, please. Thank you, Konstantin Konstantinovich. I will start with an unusual thesis. Their work is very interesting and good, because this good work needs a lot of discussion. It's not smooth. It shouldn't be smooth. But this discussion should generate disagreements and this, debate. And the European Union and Russia, it's been the relationship between these two powers has been dealt with in many studies, and this work shows something new in many respects, in many parameters. The novelty of this work is in the approach to look at Russia and the European Union as through the balance of power and institutions. I haven't seen such works before. I think this idea is very productive, and it can be applied to the study of other regions, and therefore this idea goes beyond the dissertations, and it's very good. So this is the theoretical significance of the work. Practical significance is what will Russia do in this situation, or should Russia do in this? Why is the relation between Russia and US so problematic? All of a sudden, everything was good, and then all of a sudden, well, it was not, of course, suddenly, but our relationship has become so complex. The author is very attentive to historical facts and historical documents. I have a political science, so I would like to commend the author for very careful use of historical material in a political science work or research. The terminology is of political science terminology. This combination of the historical material and political science framework is very productive, and this is a big plus of the work. The work starts with a historical analysis, how EU institutions were built. The author shows that Europe and the European Union starts to build their institutions. There were common institutions, European institutions, and there were some that where Russia wasn't a part of the Soviet Union, created alternative institutions or mirror institutions. For example, the Union of Mutual Cooperation. The Soviet institutions proved ineffective after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and we are building alternative or mirror institutions, the Eurasian Economic Union, or the Union of Security Cooperation. Is this the repetition of the past? So, what else would I like to mention here? The reasoning in the dissertation is as follows. The author views Russian policy to mention that at the initial stages Russia didn't have clear policies towards Europe, and Russian policy was twofold. I don't know if you agree with me, but this duality is now evaporating with Eastern European countries joining the European Union institutions. Very interesting moment, very interesting point when Timofey Vyacheslavovich says Central and Eastern European countries were not part of the European Union institutions originally, but then with time they joined them. Why? And he answers this question because in terms of the military capacity they were weaker. The next point that we should look at is that the author says when balance of power changes, the world changes. When Russia restores the balance of power, what happens? Are we returning to the history that was before? Is the tension relieved? If the institutions and the balance of power are balanced? Again. And then next point. These are my critical remarks. Very good, interesting work, and it answers many questions. It meets the requirements, but nevertheless, there are some drawbacks, which is normal. The first one is the use of theoretical foundations in the dissertation. The author refers to realism and the liberal institutions, and then draws the most attention to the founding fathers of realism, and on the other hand, on the Vyacheslavovich, on the beginning and the end of realism in terms of history. I think it's not good, because Vyacheslavovich was against the balance of power. I have a cognitive dissonance here. My suggestion is to look at Coffin and Martin in the book that you cited, but because they show that there are 5 parameters that institutional liberalism and neoliberalism match in 4 parameters, and I would like you to look at this chapter and create a theoretical foundation for your research. The next one is the restriction of the force factor. You talk about morality, and you think I was confused here, because morality is different with different nations or different people. If I like something, my opponent doesn't like this or that person or thing. How can we find common ground? Maybe values and interests should be used. There was a big discussion in the previous century about the compatibility of European and Russian values. I would return to the interests and values, and the main focus should be interests. The restrictions or limitations. The interest is not to play a zero-sum game and destroy each other. About the balance of power. at the beginning of my review, there's a phrase. In the beginning of the dissertation, there's a phrase. The balance of power is a combination of force potential with the prevailing soft power capacities. But then you continue talking about hard power. And so my question is, if soft power is meant, our relations with the European Union in the gas sphere, is it hard power or soft power? And sanctions and counter-sanctions, hard power or soft power? Well, I'm not sure. The next point. Non-state actors is my favorite topic. I love them. You treat only inter-state relations, but you should look beyond that. What's the role of non-state actors? For example, sub-regional actors. For example, St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg is a very active. Was very active with Northern Europe, Germany. So, what's the role of this intercity relations, and whether they could be hooks with the European Union, between Russia and the European Union? Timofey Vyacheslavovich looked at said that if in the past Russia was allowed to join the European Union institutions, it would be a different story. But universities work very actively with European institutions, and they influencing policy decisions of the European Union. Large cities cooperate economically, and this is maybe a channel which Russia can use to improve its relations with Europe. And of course, I have to say at the end that the work meets all the requirements that my dissertation of Timofey / Bordachev on the topic the relationship of Russia and the European Union, and the origins of a crisis in the European international order meets key requirements. The key requirements set in the procedure of awarding academic degrees in St. Petersburg University, specified in the Act dated 19 November 2021, and the candidate Timofey Bordachev deserves being awarded an academic degree of Doctor of Political Science in the degree field 5.5.4 International Relations. Clauses 9 and 11 of the said procedure have not been violated by the candidate. I think the candidate the candidate, based on his publications, actually deserves the academic degree already. Dear colleagues, dear chairman, the previous reviews outlined the pluses of this work. The fuller the work, the more interesting the work, the more questions it generates, and I'm very happy to get. I'm very interested in this morality issue that is raised by the author, as my question was about the Cold War, and I totally agree that the policies of the West towards Russia was irrational and unjust, and I think that this, of course, influenced the European integration and the problem of European choice towards Russia is that Europe doesn't want us to be part of the European Union, and because the European Union is quite conservative, and this creates a crisis in the European Union itself. I would like to emphasize another thing, is this. I know that Timofey Vyacheslavovich worked a lot on the Eurasian vector of policy, chapter 4, which outlines new structural relations with the European Union and the factors that influence that. Andrei Pavlovich is back. Eurasian methods, the vector is one of the variants of the common grounds that we can discuss with the European Union. So one of the strengths of Russia. Then I have some questions, of course. I would like to turn to them. The work is of high quality, but there's some controversial things. First one, about theory. The author builds his work on realism and liberal science in political science, and but he mentions a lot of geopolitics. And why not use constructivism and critical geopolitical theory, and to that would clarify a lot of issues. The second, the works of Alto, European Geopolitical Subject in the Making, could be a good source to refer to. Also, I would like to agree with the author that the research is a political science research, not historical research. But again, as the previous speaker said, I would like to see the periodization more clearly, but he mentions several periodizations, but which one he chooses is not clear. In terms of the because history is a major element of politics. Number 3, in the defended statements, provisions, we find this formulation about the end of the Cold War, that it was not because of the surrender of the USSR. We discussed that already. Then number 4, the author says that all moral argumentation of the European was based on the unilateral accusation of the Serbian side as the originally the most powerful in the conflict, and that Russia and of course Russia took the side of Serbia. Was it because of historical tradition or politics? And in number 5, the Eurasian vector of Russian policy, in the context of the relationship with the European Union, is discussed, and the author uses the concept of the big Eurasia in the Eurasian Economic Union. And I would like to see this an answer to the question, what role and do they play in the balance of power between Russia and the European Union? But on the whole, all the requirements were met, and Bordachev Timofey Vyacheslavovich deserves an academic degree of Doctor of Political Science to be awarded to him. Thank you very much. Then Timofey Evgenich Tkancha. Excellency and Constance, dear colleagues, two members confessed about their souls, historical, and I have an economic soul. I was very interested in reading this dissertation, and I think that we think that we can forecast the crisis of a crisis, and political scientists say they cannot, but I think this dissertation comes close to being able to forecast a crisis. And at the Valdai Club, Timofey Vyacheslavovich was able to present his dissertation to the audience of scholars, leading scholars, and this I would like to side with my colleagues. That's a very multifaceted dissertation, and this is the plus. But what about critical remarks? Well, the soft power. The second, the author oversimplifies the factor of force that reduces it to military threats, and I think political science studies coercion, and Alexander George and Thomas Schering in economics, though, but they showed that the United States has experience in, for example, Star Wars programs, use this mechanism to get their way. And in terms of stability, and Timofey Vyacheslavovich does a very professional analysis of political economy, economic contribution to this is the theory of Susan T. Strange. But I don't agree with the statement that the theory of hegemonic stability cannot be applied to the global level, and that it can work at the regional or inside individual subsystems. This theory that is developed by Charles Kindleberg is dedicated to the role of hegemonic state in establishing a liberal model of world economy. And this is most of the definitions of this phenomenon is it referred to open markets and low customs barriers for trade and investment. And I think liberalism and realism cannot be successful, and maybe you should have looked at the genesis of the crisis of the liberal order. In this context, you could have looked at the strengthening of institutions as a factor of change in the balance of power between states. The author of the dissertation looks at the role of economic theory, but unfortunately the economic theory in the emergence of a liberal theory of international relations, but he doesn't look at the influence of economists and political economists on the development of a realist direction. And I would like to emphasize here what we see in Schindelberger and Gilpin's works published in the 1980s and 1970s in terms of hegemonic stability. Thank you very much for this this invitation, and I'm very honored to participate. I value this dissertation very highly. First of all, the topic is very important. It's the relations between Russia and Europe is still in the center of political science, especially for specialists on Russia, and we have expert analytical schools that are quite established, and the dissertation that we're discussing now is another example of how far expert analytical analyses progressed on Russia and European. And Timofey Vyacheslavovich is an expert on Eurasia as well. Second part that is very important to me has to do with the theoretical contribution. Talking about souls, my soul is as a theoretician's soul, and it's very satisfied after reading this work, because Russia in the theoretical aspect is very weak, and there has been no national theory of international relations created in Russia, or even a lot of researchers doubt that it is important, and Russia is acting under the influence of liberal approaches developed in Russia. Russia is a great power that has been formed through the accumulation of military power and classical diplomacy, and Marxist in terms of the West, we have Marxist leaning schools of political science, and that was even before the collapse of the Soviet Union. I think that Timofey Vyacheslavovich tried to go farther. The research that I talked about tried to shake off the influence of these liberal constraints and go along the realist road. And we already heard of Bordachev's treatment of Carr and others, morals and law, and the view on the balance of power on the one hand and the institutions on the other, and this dialectical interdependence. Their interdependence, dialectical interdependence. These are the most important motives of how the author treats the relationship between Europe and Russia. There can be other approaches as well, and I hope that that this station will be published in Russian, and maybe you should take up Constructivism, which I like to, because the European Union would have not formed without Russia, because for Europe, Russia is the significant other, and because without Russia, the European would have not existed. This is accepted by classical realism. I think that this is a step forward. I think it's an important step forward. You should progress in this direction. move in this direction, because Russia needs a dialogue with Europe, deepening its dialogue, but from its own positions, based on its capacities and military and other capacities, but also identity. Maybe Russia should not look at itself as a great power only, but as a different power, and that as a Eurasian power that would talk with Europe as a different power as well. This, in terms of the suggestions to the author, if Timofey Vyacheslavovich develops these positions in the academia and publish, I think these suggestions will move the discussion along. As far as the alternative approaches, I will just side with Stanislav Leonidovich that it's important to say that Russia and Europe are divided by political economic distance. So there's an economic competition, and this competition will only grow. Now, including the environmental issues, and but these class foundations will not disappear. This work tackles with neoliberal approaches, especially when they discuss the tensions between Russia and Europe or the West. They talk about the political regimes. Russia is different from Europe as an autocratic regime. This is a known liberal position you can develop. I have two positions vis-a-vis classical realism, which I specify in my review. Both have to do with realist approaches in Russian international policy. You must reflect the role of the United States in the tension between Russia and the European Union. Timofey agrees with this position. It's just a question of developing it theoretically, because it's a theoretical position, because approaches whether Russia should be part of the European Union, should have been part of this, is one position, but the role of the United States as a hegemonic power is a different issue. I think Timofey had a task of reflecting realism in describing the role of realism in Russian policy. He was successful at doing that. but you should go further. And another idea is about the role of leaders. In Constructivism, it is designated as structured agency. It's the interaction between our actions and the structures that have been created and that shape international relations. Regional security, realists, as we all know, ontologically, are closer to materialistic interpretations. They look at the force capacities that create the structure, that then influences the character of relations between states. But on the other hand, in classical realism, and it's very important for Russian realists to retain, is the motive of leadership, of rational and morally grounded decisions regarding international relations. In structural moralism, structural realism, and Verschaven and Verschaven don't talk about it, although they're very critical of American policy and foreign policy, and they criticize their leaders, but toward China, stuff like that. But theoretically, they don't articulate their ideas. But in classical realism, there is that. Well, you started with quoting from Carr, saying it would be an oversimplification is to reduce the crisis to the role of leaders. In classical realism, but the role of the person, the leader, is very important. They talk about the prudence of taking decisions. This prudence didn't play a part, and when the concert in Vienna was built, Russia was not included, and that was a mistake. And the European Union followed this mistake, and then and this is one of the crucial points that the author of the dissertation should develop. And I will stop here, not to take up your time, and I again would like to say again that I appreciate the work very highly, and to end my review with the positions that are important for us to be explicitly stated. The dissertation of Timofey, Vyacheslavovich, Bordachev on the topic the European Union and the Russia and the European Union and the emergence, the origins of the crisis of the European international order, meets all the key requirements of the procedure of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the candidate Timofey Bordachev deserves the sought academic degree of Doctor of Political Science. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. And the last one is by me. I read the work, very interesting research work from the theoretical and practical points of view. A lot of sources were reviewed. The conclusions are very original, and they should find application to practical activities, but science as well. I think that when the author of Dissertation continues working on this subject matter, he should develop the conclusions made in this dissertation. The hypothesis is valid, and structurally the dissertation is logical, and all the provisions are proved by the dissertation. This is a result of many years of work, very balanced work, and that meets highest requirements. In terms of the critical remarks, well, they are not critical remarks as such, but this is information as food for thought, for future research, future discussion about the relationship between Russia and the European. A lot is said in the discussion about Russia, how Russia developed its policy towards the European Union, but less is said about the European Union, how it has developed its policy towards Russia, because there have been many controversial points, and in our discussion here we see that the European Union had debates over its policy. So whether Russia can be part of the European Union, or could be part of the European Union in the 90s. This had to do with what they thought and what they did to formulate their policy. What is the role of Russia? What was the role of Russia in the foreign policy of the European Union? Well, you should have emphasized that. Second issue, where I repeat some other reviews, is the question about the links between cities and or NGOs or public associations in different countries in Russia and the European Union. You should pay more attention to that. Not only interstate their relationships, but I have I'm in favor of cross-border cooperation, for example. But I'm very doubtful that these public diplomacy links can actually influence that much. And then the soft power issue. Well, the public opinion about the use of soft power in Russia has changed many times, like a pendulum, and the same happened in the European Union. But Russia does have soft power, and I would say that we should what would be our partners within the European Union? What social stratas of society in Europe are friendly to us? We should look at about this. Think about this. Well, there are some very minor remarks I'm not going to read. They're in my review. As you can guess, I'm of high opinion about the dissertation, but I would have to say that official phrase that the dissertation of Timofey Vyacheslavovich Bordachev on the topic the relationship between Russia and the European Union and the origin of a crisis of the European international order after the Cold War meets key requirements established by the procedure of awarding academic degrees at Petersburg University, and the candidate Timofey Vyacheslavovich Bordachev deserves being awarded an academic degree of Doctor of Political Science in International Relations. And now, Timofey Vyacheslavovich, your turn to answer questions. Please answer our comments and critical remarks. Thank you very much. Dear members of the Dissertation Committee, colleagues and friends, dear Chairman, I'd like to thank esteemed members of the Dissertation Committee for a close reading of my dissertation and for your questions. I honestly believe that all the questions and comments and remarks are of high academic importance. They can be used by me or other colleagues as starting points for new research on the subject. And I tried to organize the some remarks into thematic blocks, and others I will answer individual. The first block is as the structure of the station is the theoretical aspects, and the most important, the work is based on classical works of realist paradigm, and the work of Carr that is used in my dissertation cannot be deemed solely realistic or realist, because the answers to the questions he gives through institutions. The solutions are through the creating formal institutions, and this gives the opportunity. Institutions give the opportunity to resolve issues, but you also said that the theoretical foundation of such a study can be expanded. I thought that the current state of international relations presents a bankruptcy of theoretical approaches, theoretical approach of political science. of international relations, the theory of international relations. This challenge makes me draw upon classical approaches, maybe at the expense of the theories and the concepts that you drew my attention to, and my work is trying to pinpoint the most stable concepts, and in our discipline I totally agree that this attempt is restrictive, and it blocks my ability to appeal to other frameworks. And I totally agree with the idea that I should expand my theoretical framework, political, economic, political and historical, because the subject matter of my research is in the focus of those disciplines, and it would, if I use those, would improve my the quality of my research. But I reserve my right to say that I had a very concrete hypothesis, and I had to prove it, and therefore I had to limit myself. I think Mersheimer is very gloomy when I use his criticism of institutions. I throw away his concept, and I'm drawn to a car. Although he wrote in much more dramatic times than Mersheimer, and I'm trying to look at the morality and justice in international relations, not in the context of national policies, but in the international context. I look at morality as an embodiment of justice towards in the relations between states, with nations. For us, and for me, the expression of morality or moral behavior is the self-restraint in the face of the ability to do something by force. And this, I believe, was the mistake of the European Union when they could do anything they want, and they self-indulged, and they left out Russia and China. They were close to total dissatisfaction with the world order, and therefore this revolutionary situation, this revolution was created, but the total revolution was only prevented by the fact that Russia had nuclear weapons. After the Cold War, the United States was fully satisfied even in the context of some limitations within the Security Council. Unfortunately, this hegemonic behavior the hegemonic behavior of one player that is totally satisfied create a dissatisfaction and animosity from others. And I agree with your remark about Johann Martin, and I read this work, and I just forgot to cite it and quote it. When I talk about definitions of the liberal world order, it's not generally accepted, yes, but I use it. Balance of power is a central category of my work, and the question is quite correct, that what do I imply by the balance of power? I imply by it is the balance of capacity, the key capacity of which is the military capacity, and this capacity to destroy, that is most effective, or the only one effective in this, if a nation means to destroy the international order. With soft power you cannot do that. And so the paradox is that the balance of power that emerged in Europe after the Cold War was built without the foundation, the military foundation. But Russia had a military capacity, and on the contrary, and the situation that we arrived at, that is based on the fact that the European world order didn't account for military capacities, and of course now the gas policy, coercion, etc., is added. But in terms of public diplomacy, in terms of the environmental issues, of course, this is very important. When I talk about when I don't talk about non-state players, of course I neglect a very important layer of the playing field. But I'm not sure whether this dimension or these players are independent. Do they serve the interests of nation states or nations, or do they serve the common interests of Europe and Russia together? In terms of the role of the United States, it's very important. This is very important in any work about Europe and Russia. The fact that the United States has the the highest military capacity and economic capacity in the world, you're tempted to include that in any work, in my work as well, but I consciously made a decision not to do that. I wanted to focus on Europe and Russia because but the United States are leaders of the community, the West, and but why I focus on the European integration is because I want to see how European integration influences the relationship between Russia and the European Union. And it's funny to say that that the collapse of the European Union, the collapse can actually benefit the relations between Europe and Russia, because in this case, every individual country can have a voice in dealing with Russia and build its own policy. And well, there's of course a political economic dimension, as Stanislav Leonidovich and Andrei Pavlovich point out, and the analysis of sources. My heart of a historian bled when I didn't do that in my dissertation. My first background is historian, and for me it was very hard to cut out. It was hard for me to cut out the analysis of sources. But in some episodes, as the raisins from a bun, I take some elements and I give an analysis of them. But on the whole, and this concerns the question about how the European Union, the analysis of the motivations and of the European Union decisions. Because for me, the goals that the European Union set before itself was the key motivation for their policies, and for them. And I think that unfortunately didn't prove to be politically prudent, because their goals of their own development, was the goals of their development were set primary, and all the interests of other countries were disregarded. Well, in terms of chronology, in my introduction, I give an overview of different chronologies after the Cold War. I suggest I don't choose any one of them, but I just draw the reader's attention to some highlights, as we call them, triggers in the history of the relations between Europe and the European Union and Russia. The factors of force and the changes of the balance of power, 2008 and 2014. So these are the two dates that are of principal importance for me. The Soviet Union built its institutions. They were hegemonic, as just as hegemonic the United States institutions were after the Second War, but they were less stable, and we can now as Russia should build institutions that should be as stable as the United States institutions. But as a realist, I can acknowledge that the stability of these institutions was actually supported by the military and economic domination of the United States. Well, soft power plays a role too, and but we'll see whether the Eurasian Economic Union is as weak as the Soviet Partnership for Mutual Assistance and Union for Mutual Assistance. Nuclear powers don't depend on allies in its survival. And maybe this is why the Soviet Union watched indifferently the fleeing of their former allies to the West. Morality. Some questions I would like to address in terms of the contradiction of the European Union and Russia in the Balkans. This shows that we understand this point of view, depending on the liberal vector of foreign policy. The EU countries took a realist position. We will support Muslims and Croatians. Then we know that Russia will support the Serbs. The important commentary by Stanislav Leonidovich concerned the theory of hegemonic stability. I tried to address this issue when I discussed the role of the United States and how stable the international world order can be when just one state is totally satisfied with it. I tried to answer all the other questions, and if you think that I missed something, left something out, I have all your questions in writing. I will work on them, and I will work at them with my master students at the High School of Economics. Tatiana Alexeyevna Romanova will support me in that. Thank you very much. Yeah, you will exploit your students. Yes. Well, I'll exploit you to exploit my students. Yes. Dear members of the Dissertation Committee, are you satisfied with the answers of Timofey Vyacheslavovich for your questions? Yes, totally. Yes, totally. Yes, totally. Yes, totally. Andrei Pavlovich, more than satisfied. I am also satisfied. Now the next item is open floor discussion. Anyone who would like to speak? Yes, please. Sergey Alexandrovich Karaganovich, Doctor of Historical Science, Professor, academic Director of the High School Economics. Dear colleagues, I would like to congratulate all of us. You will decide, of course, but the results up to now are quite good. I congratulate the academic advisor, first of all, because this is a high class of St. Petersburg school. Methodologically, it's a very good work. Timofey Vyacheslavovich worked with us and succeeded in their work. He's not a European politics scholar now, but a global politics scholar. He's done a lot in this, achieved a lot. The roots of his success lie here, and therefore congratulate the faculty of international relations and the university on this wonderful offspring. I enjoyed the dissertation, well written. I can agree or disagree with some statements, but this is not a time for discussion, debate, because most of my questions have been answered by him already. Timofey Vyacheslavovich is a very creative person, and I would like to challenge him with one problem. And I've been thinking about it for a long time, and now I have formulated it after hearing about the work. Of the past 60 years, when we jumped from the Marxist dogma to another dogma, this dissertation can be even better as one's last song over the theory of international relations. Andrei Pavlovich said this, and there cannot be an international theory of international relations if we don't reject the role of the leader or national policy. We try to do it within the Marxist theory, but when we saw that Marxist paradigm was not necessary, was not suitable, the Soviet science turned to another paradigm, to the liberal one, And one way, and now it's proved to be futile as well. One way is to create a Russian theory of international relations, and the other answer they cannot be a theory of international relations. They can be a theory of international policy, because we should understand why and how states act, and we should discuss that with students, and maybe that. And again, congratulations, my colleagues in the university and my colleagues in the high school economics. But this is the question I want to pose. Lukyanov Fyodor Alexandrovich, professor and the research fellow of High School of Economics. Dear members of the Dissertation Committee, dear guests, dear candidate, after Sergei Alexandrovich, we should wrap up our meeting because we are close to self-negation. And the first thing, two things. First thing is that Timofey Vyacheslavovich is a very happy person, very good thing to see that theoretical, when you see the theory taking place at the background of practical developments, real life developments that is happening now. And this is a rare happiness, that this coincidence to see the practical use of your theoretical work is heartwarming. We've known each other for over 20 years during professional and friendly moments. We have sparred intellectually many times. We start through messengers and start at 8 in the morning, 8 and at midnight. We argue a lot. We sometimes get angry. But I should say that I totally believe that this person deserves being a doctor in political science, because he lives by what he researches. And please, I would like to ask members of the Dissertation Committee, please confer this degree on this person, because this is the right person to be awarded this degree. Thank you very much, Constant, dear colleagues. I will support the high evaluation of the dissertation, which we heard here, but this dissertation, from my point of view, from the point of view of a person who has been chairman of the Dissertation Committee in Political Sciences, has seen many dissertations. This work, or the deputy chairman, this is a very bold work. This is very unusual. We should be honest with ourselves. A dissertation is not the place where academic scientific discoveries are made. It should be smooth. It shouldn't provoke anyone, and because there's a prerequisite of passing it through dissertation committees, higher station commission, and so on. But I believe that this dissertation is absolutely provocative, because it discusses the colliding schools of realism and liberalism in the defended provisions. The author provides a synthesis of elements of liberalism and realism, but when you read the text, it is the distinction is an uprooting of liberalism. It looks at institutions as a cynical tool of pursuing interests, and this is and without any morals. And this is dethroning of liberalism is very important, and it's to the credit of the author, because we look at the author's concept. First of all, we can say that this is an apotheosis of culmination of a blunt realism, and but if we look at it from the point of view Sergei Alexandrovich, not theory determines practical politics, but theory is the servant of practical politics. And therefore the cynical use. Why should, if institutions are cynical instruments of policy, why should theory be highly moral? And the second thing is, when we see European Union policies, when we read about our European Union studies are written using the apparatus, the terminology of the European Union, because this is our politeness. But this work completely disrupts this politeness. On the one hand, this can be deemed as a disadvantage, but on the other side, on the other hand, I think that this is a cynical constructivist narrative, and the author knows, the authors personally of Federica Mogherini's era, the dissertation is provocative, because if an official from the European Union reads it, this official will be outraged. But if we look at the link between theory and practical politics, this is how we should write. And another thing, the crisis of international order, liberal order. The title of the work is The Relation Between Russia and the EU. This, of course, stipulates the necessity to center on Russia, but we should also look at the other side, of course. And when an outsider reviews the policy towards it from other institutions, it creates a revolutionary situation in theory. Timofey Vyacheslavovich compartmentalizes the European liberal order. Within the European Union, the liberal order works in this or that way, because the balance of power is there. The constructivist would say that common values are at play, but outside the European Union, the war is raging, the political war is raging. But if again we turn to the Europeans for their assessment of the title, they will disagree strongly that there is a crisis. A doctoral dissertation must devise theoretical statements that are of academic value. I think that the author's theory of international relations can be termed a contribution, a high contribution to theory, to science. This is an undoubted conclusion that everybody here supported. Therefore, I would like to endorse this dissertation. Tatiana Romanova, candidate of political science, associate professor of European Studies Department, St. Petersburg University. Marina Mikhailovna said in this station, called this station interesting and bold, and I think it's daring. There aren't many theoretical dissertations that emerge, and every work is very daring because it undermines the established foundations. And this is a successful there. I'm not in favor of a Russian School of International Relations, but I believe in the universal School of International Relations or Global International Relations. I think that we should use use their language to explain our policy. And I think that dissertation makes a great contribution to this. My recommendation is that the author focuses on the prognostic direction, and maybe for political recommendations, to develop political recommendations to Russia and the European Union. I would like to endorse this dissertation and express my high evaluation of it. Irina Nikolaevna, Dean of Faculty of International Relations. I was very happy to read the dissertation. I've been following the work and we've discussed a lot, and just a few things. Very good approbation of the material. That means that every statement that is included in the dissertation has actually been discussed at conferences, in papers, and in chapters and monographs, etc., in book chapters, etc. Another thing is that we are witnessing a defense of the dissertation in a new specialism, international relations, called international relations. And because this is now part of political science, because this is a field of international relations. Because international relations is now looked at through the prism of political science. International relations is an interdisciplinary area, and you see that this is written, when you read the work, you see that it's written by a historian, by a political scientist, and all this. But at the same time, it keeps the balance at the interface of these sciences, and also it keeps the balance of the practical and theoretical dimensions. And as a graduate of the Faculty of International Relations, we are following your career, and you are a role model for our students. And this dissertation is an independent, very valuable work. No other questions? No other statements? Any questions through the email? No questions by email. Timofey, the concluding statement to answer all the before the could you answer all the yeah, that's not a complete statement. Yeah, this is the summary of the discussion. Dear members of the dissertation committee, dear colleagues, who are in the audience. I would like to thank you for our discussion. I think that we've opened several very important academic themes that I'd be interested to pursue, and my colleagues would be. I hope that the science of internationalism will live. It will go through different transformations and disillusionments, good and bad news, but it will develop and live in some way or another. And the theoretical paradigms will develop too, and the ones that will emerge, I disagree with Oleg Nikolaevich. I don't deliver a verdict of the liberal paradigm because I see that I focus on the balance of power, but they prove that the account of the aspect of force makes states behave more morally and restrain their egoism and self-restraint. I am thankful to you for the discussion. Colleagues, then no one else wants to speak then, and I would like to ask members of the Dissertation Committee, are there any objections or questions regarding the procedure? No objections, no objections, no objections, no criticism. Andrei Pavlovich, no criticism. So this is covered. So no objections then. We are turning to the next item, voting. Before we vote, I would like to ask one question that everyone has to answer. Is there any need for a behind closed doors discussion of the verdict? No need. I cannot see any need. I don't see any need. No need. Andrei Pavlovich, no need. I agree with the same position. So this is covered as well. Therefore, I put the vote, the resolution to award an academic degree of the Doctor of Sciences in International and Political Science. And this is an open roll call vote, and therefore every member of the Dissertation Committee should voice their decision, and in this case, by saying yes or I vote in favor, they voice their agreement with the statement that the dissertation, the candidate must cite the authors and the sources of citation of all the words and the results used in the dissertation, and the dissertation must account for that. And now I would like to turn to the voting, and before that I need to announce that it is 19:29 Moscow time. Quote, I endorse the awarding clause 11 is not violated, I vote in favor. Stanislavnish, I vote in favor. Andrei Pavlovich, I totally support. I also support. The decision is then unanimous. Out of 6 members of the Dissertation Committee, 6 voted in favor. No one voted against, and no one abstained. Everybody voted in favor of awarding Bordachev Timofey Vyacheslavovich an academic degree of Doctor of Political Science in the degree field 5.5.4 International Relations. Concluding statement from Timofey Vyacheslavovich. Dear members of the Dissertation Committee, dear Chairman, dear Sergei Alexandrovich, dear colleagues, I'm very grateful for your attention to in my work, and this is a very important moment in my life. I've been going to, with your help, and with the help of Konstantin, who pushed me to European studies, and every time we met, asked me when the doctoral dissertation is ready, would be ready, and hoping to be the chairman of the Dissertation Committee, and that happened. And I'm very grateful to Professor Draganov and for the moral guidance. I would like to thank Fedor Ganov and Oleg Barabanov, for my friends, for the intellectual enrichment, and I'm very grateful to my wife, Sinevskaya, when she heard that I was going to write my dissertation in 1998, and finally it happened. And since then she's been hearing it, and I would like to thank all my new friends and my parents who are here, because the world view that I have, they put in me. It helps me to develop personally and humanly, and I'm very grateful to them for my being. And thank you for your comments, for your discussion. I would like to congratulate our candidate. Yes, thank you very much. Our work is now closed. Thank you for your participation. The broadcast should be switched off. Thank you.